So one of the ideas that I talk about when I talk about partnership as new leadership is giving your people a voice. I think that people support what they help create, right? I think we all, when you hear that, we intuitively go, that's true. But it has always been true, but if you go back before social media, it wasn't necessarily implemented. Because go back 20 years, I think people who sat in rooms understood that if I didn't hold a position of leadership, I didn't have much of a voice. And I kind of got that, and I was okay with that. But social media has changed us psychologically. This younger generation has grown up always having a voice, right? And so they come into an organization feeling like they should have a voice. Whether you agree that that's right or wrong, doesn't make a difference. If we want people to be engaged and committed to the point of implementation, then we have to involve them at the point of creation, right? People support what they help create. And so I do think there's factors that play into it with the younger generation. I mean, every generation is going to affect the work environment, it's going to affect how organizations run, and therefore how leadership needs to operate. So yeah, in large part, I do think that the younger generation, the millennials, et cetera, are creating this change in leadership where, you know, if you go back to the 80s, you had Ken Blanchard and some of these guys that talked about this change from management to leadership, and I think it's now taken that next step to where it's more of a partnership approach, and I think that's what it needs to be. I think stories connect us as human beings, and stories become important on an individual basis and on an organizational basis. So from an individual perspective, I think we use stories to create connection, to create relevance, to cause our message to be remembered, to cause people to take action. So leaders use stories, salespeople use stories. We use stories from an organizational standpoint for brand building. We use stories for culture building. I think that's one of the key elements of where we use stories. I mean, think about the stories that leaders tell reinforce the values that you profess. And so, for example, if you profess the value that you promote from within, then some of the stories that you tell need to be the stories of the person who started as a teller who's now the VP, or whatever those stories may be that reinforce those values. And so I think there's a real cultural piece to the stories that we tell as well. And so organizationally, we use them in a lot of different capacities, whether it's, you know, from the story of our brand to the stories of the individuals to the culture that we're trying to create. But I think stories are one of those glue pieces for organizations if they're used effectively. I think for us to build influence in the community, we need to be in the community, and building those relationships, that becomes important. But I will point out one thing that I think is crucial for companies and leaders to do is service is one of those things within communities that really changes your perspective. There was a study that was done at the University of Kent in southern England it was a cooperation game study. In essence, they gave a group of people a certain amount of money, and they asked those people to put the money into a pot, and they would double the size of the pot and then divide it evenly among the people. Well, they kept doing this, and the idea is if you cooperated, everybody would increase in their wealth. Inevitably, there were some people who were kind of crafty that held their money back and didn't give in to the pot. So after they finished that game, they put everybody in groups, and they asked them to elect leaders. And 78% of the people who were elected leaders were the people who gave the most in the cooperation game. And the study concluded by saying, when people see you serve, they automatically view you as a leader. And so I think that as companies, if we're involved in initiatives and actual service and giving back to the communities in different capacities, like just recently in Houston, when the floods were happening, all of the hurricane, all of that, there was a furniture store that the guy opened up his store and said, come sleep on my furniture. Now, in the short term, is that a good business decision? Horrible business decision. In the long term, that guy's going to be beloved by that community for years and years to come, right? I mean, when you get furniture, where do you go? Oh yeah, that guy, right? So I do think there's an element that, among other things, service can be a huge factor in our building of influence from a company standpoint.